after having gone through the ordeals of slavery 300 years. Your children have come home. We are here, Father, in the midst of our being, the essence of our life, the unfolding of a dream of Pan-Africanism. African people worldwide, holding and clinging together as once that clinging was in days past.
The alma mater of North Carolina State University provides a telling example of how the campus saw diversity when it was founded on March 7, 1887. Where the winds of Dixie softly blow, o'er the fields of Caroline, there stands ever cherished NC State as thy honored shrine. The ideals of Dixie were part of NCSU until federal and state legislation mandated desegregation in 1954. Our first African-American graduate students came in 1953, the first undergraduates in 1956. But it was not until 1963 that Baxley's Restaurant became the first restaurant on Hillsborough Street to even serve African-Americans. And it would be almost a decade later that NCSU welcomed Black faculty and administrators to campus. Two men, Dr. Lawrence Moselle Clark and Dr. Augustus McIver Witherspoon, literally changed the course of history at NCSU. Both active researchers, social activists, and lovers of poetry, the impact that Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon had on North Carolina State was both unprecedented and unexpected. Their legacies live on in the institutions they created, including the African American Cultural Center, Multicultural Student Affairs, the Disability Office, the First Year College, Transition Program, the Math Science Education Network, the African American Faculty and Staff Organization, and the African American coordinators who, now as diversity coordinators, are in every college in the university. Indeed, their legacy endures, and it impacts and benefits members of the entire campus community.
What doors will you open? What's your responsibility? Indeed, until the lion has his own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So enjoy the exhibit, and we hope that you'll come back and visit the African American Cultural Center and the spirit of Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon often. Enjoy.
It's critically important that when we reach a milestone like 125 years, that we think back to all the things that have made us what we are today, and to think about it in the context of what we can do to be better in the future. And that's why we've used the word tradition and transformation to describe this celebration, because it's not just about remembering our traditions and celebrating them, but it's about how the university continues to be transformed by the legacy of people like Lawrence Clark and Gus Witherspoon.
You won't find, or I don't think you will find, a more compassionate team of men who were so concerned about the details of life at North Carolina State for every single person who walked through the doors. They weren't just engaged in diversity efforts for people of African descent, they were engaged in it for campus-wide endeavor because they knew how important it was for us to move forward differently at North Carolina State University.
But while each maintained his respective identity, they were able to move into the mainstream, whatever that is, culture, and do well alongside people who had all their lives been a part of that culture. And to do that without being abrasive about it, but to make it well known that we're in a time of change, and it's necessary and positive change, and we know how to make that happen.
Well, I think their contribution to the wider community was their uncompromising commitment to the concept that it takes a village to raise a child. they did not in any way become isolated as academicians here at North Carolina State University. They both believed that it would take the entire community to contribute to the success of students at North Carolina State University, as well as to North Carolina State University as an institution.
They were pioneers in regard to the African American students' opportunities here on campus. And therefore, I think that it's important that the diversity of students recognize how important that was.
I think Doctors Clark and Witherspoon, they remind me of a movie about Paul Robeson that's titled The Tallest Tree in Our Forest. Doctors Clark and Witherspoon were the tallest trees in our forest. They really helped to transform NC State University.
I think how they establish the understanding of the richness by which a culture can help enhance a college community was a mark by which we could now utilize and help share with other members as well.
And we learn over again about Dr. Witherspoon and Dr. Clark. So it's like consistently we've been, as a young man being here consistently, I've been retrained and retrained and retrained. So oftentimes the history of these two men are instilled within me. So
when I think about how Gus Witherspoon and my husband Lawrence Clark worked together in tandem, I think that they were really ones that complemented each other. One may have been a bit on the, shall I say, high-strung side, and the other was a little bit on the low-key side. And I must say I felt that my husband was on the low-key side. But they often worked together here on campus, carrying out various activities that involved the students.
Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon were really an unusual pair when they would come to see you. You'd see them come in the door. If they would come one by one, you would sort of figure out that it was going to be one type of visit or another, because they kindly represented different activities within the university. But when they came as a pair, you knew this was going to be a tough day.
There were people that never wanted to be in a conversation with Dr. Witherspoon, and there were people that never wanted to be in the conversation with Dr. Clark. As a result of that, they would do the calculations and they would decide where the pressure points needed to be and who needed to be the good cop, who needed to be the bad cop, depending on the situation. I actually had the opportunity to see them do that across more than one chancellor and more than one provost and more than one dean and department head.
Gus used to tell the stories of how he first saw Clark and had to go and ask who he was and all, and they realized, and they clicked, I guess, immediately, and they shared the same mission. And so they began working together in tandem. And yes, they played good cop, bad cop.
When they arrived at North Carolina State University, the campus, like the community it represented, was not a welcoming place for African Americans or for the changes that the push for desegregation would require.
Sir, I strongly protest the appearance of the Negro Agitator King at NC State next month. He's a troublemaker, morally irresponsible, and unprincipled. And such an appearance is an insult to the white people of this area. He should be denied access to any public building in North Carolina. Sir, your reprehensible advocacy of interracial housing shows again that you are not fit to hold the high office you have among white people. No one wants this despicable situation but you and your small coterie of Negro lovers. Therefore, I suggest that you take Negroes into your home, if your character is that low, and permit all others to decide for themselves their principles or lack of principles on this score. I consider your threats and suggestions to be insulting and morally irresponsible and reflecting no credit 2U, or NC State?
The legacy that NC State promotes is one that's very white.
It was unsafe for African Americans in the community to even come past the campus.
So if you can imagine two black men convincing a white chancellor at North Carolina State University to bring in C.T. Vivian to talk to faculty and administrators about their racism here at NC State's campus. Not only suggesting that, but getting it done and having that very difficult dialogue over a long period of time. Again, with the ultimate goal being to change the campus culture. Imagine what that took to even get that idea, to get it even in any traction. But they not only decided to do it, they brought that to fruition in a way that I think right now would be almost impossible for anybody on campus to do.
When I think about the C.T. Vivian race workshops as an example, that was a time for us all to reflect, no matter our race, to really dig deep and understand what we're dealing with, whether it's self-identity or how we view others, and acknowledge those feelings, identify them, understand them, and work from that perspective versus a surface level. And so I see them as having, a major impact from that perspective across the university.
In the overnighting where CT was there to talk us through the process, he explained to people very patiently that it really isn't about just opening up people. It's getting them past that. It's getting them into an active state. So yes, that was a genius investment that Larry Clark and Gus Witherspoon helped us get to.
Whenever people open doors, it is they open doors not for themselves, but for many others, for generations and generations. But those people who open doors sacrifice. It is through sacrifice.
And to know that there have been people before me who opened doors for me is really important. Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon have they set the standard that black people could be a part of the NCSU community, and that led the way for me to be here.
Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon birthed the African American Faculty Staff Organization at North Carolina State University. Most importantly, AFSO is a place that talk about the issues of the black African American faculty and staff, and we owe it to these two great men, the very existence of AFSO.
They provided a foundation, a safe haven for graduate students and for faculty and staff of African American descent. They often opened doors for us that no one else could open, or closed doors that needed to be closed.
Born on April 4, 1934, and a native of Danville, Virginia, Dr. Lawrence M. Clark joined the faculty as full professor of mathematics education and associate provost in 1974. He oversaw the administration of the university's affirmative action plan. An active member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, he was also an ordained minister. One of the chief hallmarks of his career was to open opportunities for study abroad travel to the African continent. His favorite poem, The Power of My Black Hand, reads, "But when I know the power of my black hand, I will snatch my freedom from the tyrant's mouth, know the first taste of freedom on my eager tongue, sing the miracle of freedom with all the force in my lungs, christen my black with exuberant creation." That's exactly what he did as the university's chief diversity officer. His work opened the door for African American students, faculty, and staff to become an important part of North Carolina State University's heritage. Dr. Lawrence M. Clark died on January the 23rd, 2012, leaving his legacy intact.
Yeah, right here. Gotta have a little faith. Hey, brother.
When I looked at that picture of Larry Clark in a basketball uniform, and his coach said he couldn't play a lick, but he elevated the IQ. That's me. I played basketball. I wore a uniform, but I never saw myself as a basketball player. I thought I was a student who played ball. That was the projection of Larry Clark.
I believe by the time Lawrence Clark arrived, the faculty were more open to an African American presence, and certainly we had strong leadership at the top that welcomed African American students and faculty, and I believe Dr. Clark was hired with strengthening those populations in mind. So for him, by coming in as a full professor, that gave him the leverage he needed to pursue those things he was hired to do, and that was enhance our presence on this campus.
But we are at a point where we must address this, and colleges and universities, a place where our future leaders are going to be. At North Carolina State, we are trying to do some things to enhance the discussion. Our chancellor has taken leadership. The Faculty Senate has set in motion some resolutions. The chairman of the Faculty Senate goes with us on various visits when we have our race awareness seminars. And we are doing that around the campus. And so I think this speaks well to the university at this point in time. But the community must do more. And we challenge people. And the young people also tell us that there are some of our faculty members that are not totally sensitive to this issue. And that's why we have zeroed in on our deans and our department heads to make sure that these things are discussed.
Mm-hmm. He would constantly show up when least expected to see how things were going, and to, I think, also to remind us all of what we should keep our eye on, our focus on, in terms of what needed to happen, particularly for African Americans here on campus, on NC State campus.
Dr. Clark was a historian, so whenever he had a point that he wanted you to learn, he would always relate it to our history as a people, and sometimes he would recite poetry to get his points across.
That's another thing I owe him, and that is the emphasis on poetry and the incorporation of it in my classes. One of his, and you mentioned Langston Hughes too, one that I really owe him a lot for is The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And I've used that one. I use that one in my class when I'm talking about blood, because with the life sciences, it's easy to bring that one in, where to talk about the antiquity, the history of Africans as the first people, and older than the flow of human blood in human veins.
And as we move into a greater interdependency among nations, I think it behooves us to come to the academic table understanding other cultures, and we would fare much better.
I met him here in Ghana in 1993 when he brought a group of people on a tour. And from that time to the end of his life, we became very close friends because we share the same ideals and values.
Prayer. Dr. Willis, let's go over in a serious way. We dedicate ourselves to our identity, fight for the struggle of our people, no matter where they are.
Dr. Clark loved the country and had a genuine passion to link Ghana and then the U.S. together. He helped to sign a memorandum of understanding between NC State and the University of Ghana, through which there were exchange programs between NC State and Ghana. Some of our Ghanaian faculty members and students went to NC State to study there, and NC State students also came to Ghana to study here.
And at North Carolina State University, I believe, we now have a
African American Studies minor, is that correct?
We have a minor. Also, the black students and the African American students now and the white students agreed some years ago that they would use student fees and build an African American Culture Center. Mm-hmm. And we do have such a building already up and in place, and we are trying now to put the proper programs in. And it will be a nice place that will cross racial lines, talking about the contributions that the African Americans have made. And that's a plus for the university.
He came in my office and he brought me a wooden carving of a lion. And one of his favorite sayings was, "Until the lion has its own historian, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." And he had a massive collection of wooden carvings based off of his journeys to and from the continent. And for him to give me that lion holding that feather meant the world to me.
What I remember most was just the presence that he brought into the room. Very polished, very handsome looking man, more specifically an elder. I felt that you could sense that he had brought something unique to the experience here at NC State.
Dr. Witherspoon was a dancer. He loved to dance. While Clark, on the other hand, used to say, "I can't dance at all." At the same time, he was a wonderful singer. He had a beautiful voice and liked to croon and serenade whenever he was walking up and down the hallways.
The things you never wanted to do would play cards with Larry Clark, because as a mathematician, he was going to run a Boston on you, particularly if you're playing whist, anytime he wanted to.
He was also a very brilliant scholar. In fact, he was a mathematician. And I often told him that he was an epitome of the African proverb that says that the offspring of an elephant will never be a dwarf. And Dr. Clark was certainly a giant of a man whose contributions will last as long as human memory lasts.
Dr. Augustus MacIver Witherspoon was born on September 11, 1931. In 1969, he became the first African-American student to earn a master's degree in botany and later became the first African-American to receive a PhD in the field. In fact, at the time, he was only the second African-American to receive a PhD from this university. In 1971, he joined the department as a faculty member, where he eventually rose to the rank of full professor. He served as the assistant dean and later the associate dean of the graduate school, the associate provost, and coordinator of African American affairs. He served the university honorably until his death on June the 15th, 1994. In 1995, the Witherspoon Student Center was named in his honor. He was known for his activism on behalf of all students, faculty, and staff, and he had an enormous impact on the graduate students he served during his tenure as the dean of the graduate school. The words of his favorite poem, If, by Rudyard Kipling, resonate in his life and his work. If neither foe nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it, and which is more, you will be a man, my son. Dr. Witherspoon is especially remembered for his work with African American male students and for his advocacy on behalf of African American faculty and staff.
His favorite poem was If. And if you look at that poem and look at the verses in it, and Gus would recite it all the time. The whole idea is that feel every moment and every minute and do all you can with the time that you have here on earth.
Gus was a dreamer, and he believed dreams could come true. But with hard work, dedication, and commitment, he believed that with all his heart. And all he ever told me was he wanted to make a difference.
In Gus's quiet way, he was a stimulus for things that maybe culminated somewhere else, and people, even those who were close to him, would not have necessarily known that he was the originator, the generator of, because he wouldn't boast about it. I think he learned early on that the less credit you take, the more you can get other people to work, and he practiced that. And then finally, as a friend, Gus was the type friend that you could know that without having to converse with him, if you saw him this month and didn't see him for another 3 months, you just started where you left off.
Image is what you see from afar, not what you see from within. And there is principle of fact as to why the image exists in the black community concerning North Carolina State University. If we consider this in the historical perspective, that we came in this nation from a time of total segregation, that is, separation of the races by structure and by function, through a time of desegregation, which we refer to often as integration, to a time of total participation. During this time of segregation, the black community was void of the opportunities that North Carolina State University afforded to the white community.
We were in graduate school here at the same time. He was a little ahead of me, and he was in the botany department, and I was in zoology. So to have someone, a fellow biologist, to interact with and share what was going on was very helpful to me, and his serving as in a mentoring role.
I wouldn't say there was institutional racism, but certainly there were individuals who did not have his best interests at heart. And so he needed to be a scholar of the highest magnitude to excel not only in his major area of botany, but in chemistry courses. He tells us a story of an experience he had with a physical chemistry course that he made a B on the first exam, and how it shocked the instructor, and so he checked and double-checked the paper and called Gus in for an interview to ensure that, yes, he really knew the material.
Dr. Witherspoon impressed me with the stories that he could tell. One of his stories involved him dressing up in his overalls rather than in his suit, and walking about campus to see how the students were being treated on campus. And most of the people thought he was a custodian, so he behaved accordingly.
I first went to NC State at Dr. Clark's invitation in the fall of 1993, and that was when I met Dr. Augustus Witherspoon, who was also a like-minded person and a very passionate son of Africa.
He started the fraternities, and he put Alpha on every white campus in North Carolina that didn't have it.
I remember how hard he fought, for example, for our fraternity to be the first African-American fraternity to have a fraternity house here at North Carolina State. And he was in ill health at that time. But he explained to us that this was not about just stepping and things that are viewed in popular culture, that this was about leadership.
Gus coached football. I don't know if he ever won a game or not. I dare say he probably did ordinarily, but I guarantee you he fostered some ways of thinking about yourself as a human being. Young people need to see that.
Witherspoon was the one that introduced me to my wife on a blind date. He set up a blind date at a convention. We were in Atlanta, of all places. And so I met her in August and married her in December. And Gus, who was a minister, did the wedding.
I remember sitting in Dr. Witherspoon's office. He said, "Well, what you going to do with your degree?" My take was, I'm going to go get a job. Well, he said, no, what are you going to do with it as it relates to making the world a better place and for the masses of your people?
We called Dr. Witherspoon Pop because he was such a father figure to many of us, and especially when we needed wisdom. You know, we knew who we could go to get that. It wasn't about being told what we wanted to hear or being told what we, you know, what would make us feel good. It was really for the wisdom that he carried. And he always emphasized the importance of elders. And he was absolutely an elder on this campus.
He was walking across campus one day, and I happened to see him just by circumstance. And I can tell that he had already by then lost all of his hair, and he was somewhat frail. And I could tell that he wasn't feeling too well. And I asked him what he was doing. He went through a litany of assignments and things that he was working on that seemed to me to be extremely mundane tasks. And the amazing part about that was that even when he was at probably the lowest point of his life, he was still extremely committed.
Witherspoon Student Center, dedicated to the memory of Augustus McIver Witherspoon, 1930-1994, scientist, educator, mentor, humanitarian, for his wisdom and commitment to excellence and his untiring devotion to justice, human understanding, and the dignity of all people. Dedicated April 1st, 1995.
Gus would be so thrilled to know. He would be embarrassed a little bit, and he would try to downplay it. But to know that this building was named for him, he would have tried to get you to name it for somebody else. He would not have wanted this honor, but he certainly deserved it.
And most people didn't get a chance to see the fun-loving side of them, but they were both characters. Gus and Larry were always doing practical jokes on one another. They rarely got other people involved, but they were such good friends that they knew one another's moves very, very well.
And they were a magnificent team. Both celebrated each other. One was not in any way envious of the other's success. To the contrary, they contributed and celebrated each other because they were comfortable in who they were and whose they were, and they taught us to be the same way.
The legacy of the people who are responsible for changes that sustain themselves, it's kind of up to the people who are being sustained to decide how does this matter to me, and to what level am I willing to make this apparent to everyone else that it was valuable in my time when I was at NC State.
Because it's really important to consider that everything that is going on campus now relating to minority students began through them. So it's important to realize the impact that they had and the impact that they keep having until this day.
The foundation that they laid has made NC State more inclusive, and even though students are only here for, 4 to 5 to 6 years, they walk away from their experience here at NC State knowing that they can talk to these people in every walks of life, and those experiences that they've had with every type of person, is a part of them in some way, shape, or form. And so they're able to have an impact, where all of us are able to have an impact on each other, no matter where we come from, no matter what color our skin is, no matter what gender we are, because they have laid that foundation.
I believe that Dr. Witherspoon and Dr. Clark knew that it was difficult for minority students to be placed in a predominantly white institution, or, around individuals who didn't all look the same as us, because not everyone came from a diverse high school or a diverse background. So this was the first time a lot of people, you know, were maybe the only black person or one of two black people in a class, and that could be a real cultural shock.
Yes, I think that as minorities, we tend to identify with each other no matter what the situations are, because we face the same challenges. And I feel like that's a really important thing for everybody to understand and to realize, because by uniting within us, we help each other and empower each other to become better.
I feel that, like, as being one of the earliest black professors here at North Carolina State University, I feel that it might have been very discouraging. At the same time, I feel that they made a way and they actually bonded together to make it more of an encouraging effort. They actually knew that there were African-American students that were here, and that could actually be a support for them.
I think Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon were instrumental. I think just by having the mere presence of African-American males like myself implemented in the program, that was a great feat in itself. I think to be able to see someone who looks like me and to pass that down generationally to those who come after me as a great, great, great experience that needs to be perpetuated.
They have really helped me connect with people like myself on this campus, which is very important at a PWI. And I also feel that I would thank them if I had the opportunity to meet them. I would just thank them for everything they've done, and they really encouraged me to step outside of my comfort zone and want to leave a legacy myself at North Carolina State University.
We have the resources and we have the community to do it, especially with the center and through the offices. Multicultural Student Affairs is a big one. The diversity coordinators, to connect with somebody within your college, and so it just helps you know as a community we can grow and we can succeed and we can get so far.
And so I can see myself being in their shoes, my advisor's shoes, and doing the same thing that they taught me. So I feel like they triggered learning for a whole generation.
The foundation that they built, it's just, you know, it's hard to say how different we would look had they never been here and had they never done the work that they did. You know, having recently come to NC State from another institution, I can't tell you how different it is in terms of diversity. You know, I haven't been to every university in the South, but I have to believe that that sort of atmosphere and that sort of feeling here on campus is better than the norm for this part of the country. And I can't help but believe that Dr. Witherspoon and Dr. Clark, you know, they were the genesis for that.
The legacy that I believe that Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon left, I think it's just uniting, not forgetting where we come from, but uniting, being united as a community, and to, I guess, realize our capabilities.
Understanding that they created the Who Am I, that's actually the part of African American Symposium that impacted me most. The content of the Who Am I is really important for self-identity and understanding who you are and where you came from.
What's the essence of my being? Where am I going? What are my talents? What contributions do I want to make? Do I live inside of myself, outside of myself? Why am I here? Who am I?
So who am I? What's the essence of my being? Where have I been? Where am I going? What contribution will I make? That's Dr. Lawrence Clark. He is, you know, sometimes when people give you something, do something for you that you never can pay them back, that you know you realize you got to pay something forward. This is the person that I had to pay it forward for. When I came here as a graduate student, I ran into him and his partner and dynamic duo, Dr. Witherspoon, who this building is named for, because they changed my life, because they asked me questions like, what are you going to do with your degree?
When I see their work, what they've done, not just for themselves, but what they continue to do for us young people, man, make me want to be not just like them, but maybe better if I can. And yes, again, who am I? I am Samson Blow, and I am the future.
The trips that were made to West Africa was, I think, the result of a vision that my husband had. He was always one that was had a global perspective. And he felt that that global perspective, certainly for us, needed to be aimed at Africa. And so, as a result of his global perspective, I think that he not only talked about it, but he figured that he needed to do something to cause it to happen. And so he was instrumental in helping to raise funds and to generate awareness so that students would actually want to travel internationally. I think it was his feeling that education has not been nearly completed until you travel.
Dr. Clark was a scholar or a man who made a great contribution to the relationship between Africa and the diaspora. He had a passion for Africa, and for that reason, when I met him, I started calling him grandson of Anansi, because he was very passionate and proud of himself as an African, and he tried through his academic and social life to get others to come to share the same views.
And I really cannot describe as a historian how impactful that trip was, you know, to see the places that you teach about and try to make them come alive for students. They were very much alive for me, visiting the slave castles on the Ghanaian coast, just really moving and memorable. And that was the kind of thing that Drs. Clark and Witherspoon wanted people at NC State to experience, to know their history, to know their culture, and to really be moved by that, to see where they come from and the journey that they'd had to get where they are now, and to realize that people were connected no matter where they were in the diaspora.
At least 13% of the American population originally came from Africa. So a lot of Americans, African Americans in particular, call Africa the motherland. So having the door open to these students to be able to see the original motherland, I think is a very important milestone, and it really opened the door for others to continue to go there.
Going to Africa, the motherland, the first time being facilitated by Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon meant going back in time and seeing what the African people were like centuries ago, to visit houses, to visit schools, to visit villages. It was an emotional experience. On one of the bus trips, I remember tears were just flowing, and I didn't know why. But as we got to the village and I began to see the people and interact, it was like being home.
At that time in my life, going to Africa with Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon was probably the most influential thing that ever happened to me at that stage. After that time, I received nothing less than an A+ in any class that I took. And that included the rest of my time as an undergraduate and my time as a graduate student. In fact, all of the students on that trip could probably recount a similar experience where their academic grades and their GPAs increased after taking that trip to Africa.
When I went to Africa in the summer of 1989, when I came back and I had a conversation with my mom said, "I can tell you have changed." And it changed my life. To the point it gets a little emotional when I think about that. What Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon poured into me was something I can't put a price on.
There were so many of us who had a very skewed concept of what might be going on the African continent, its people and its progress. That grew out of our lack of exposure, obviously, to the realities of what had happened in the last 200 years.
The fact that they opened the door to travel abroad to Africa for me was really huge. Coming from a somewhat uneducated family, even the idea of doing so and to being exposed into this community, you know, being engulfed in this African American heritage. So for me, for them to do that, it gives me, I guess, a lot of hope for my future and what I can accomplish.
There is a saying that in my language, in the Akan language, it says that "Sewunim wa mamra uyira o bedrim." What it means is that if you don't know your history, if you don't know your culture, you get lost in the multitude. Yes, I'm originally from Ghana, but it never dawned on me even to visit any of the slave castles. So going over there was an experience for me, just as it was for the students that I went there with. So by looking at the work that they've done, taking the opportunity to go to Ghana, to go to Togo, and taking students with them, just show how important that culture is. So by coming here and also seeing the work, it has helped me to revalidate my own culture.
Together, I believe that they leave a legacy of boldness and principle, of caring for your fellow man, to understand the world not just domestically but globally, to focus in on what's right.
When you know the sacrifices that they made, the nights that they stayed up, the strategic plans that they put together, the shoulders that we still stand on, then there is no way you will become tired. There is no way you will give up. There's no way you'll walk away, because you understand that if you don't do your part, then you're not honoring what they did.
This was part of the lesson that I think they taught all of us that worked with them. This wasn't just about facilitating African American students. If we helped people understand that if you learned how to facilitate this group of students, what you would do is elevate the performance of all students. And that, I think, is the real backstory on everything that Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon did.
Their legacy has to do with their impact on other people's lives. They were a very positive influence, and I immediately think about students, but they also affected the faculty and staff in a very positive way as well.
What I would like for folks to remember about Dr. Clark and Dr. Witherspoon is this whole concept of reciprocity, is that they realized that they were probably putting something in place that they may not actually sometimes see, but they knew that's why they were laboring in the vineyard. And I think it's a message to all of us who have come in, who've known them while they were living, or who have an opportunity to come through this center and to see the ripples of what they created. But it says to us that we all have to be doing things too, to put things in place for those coming behind us.
Right now, if we look at their legacy, that is Dr. Witherspoon and Dr. Clark, it's what they have done for us. When I say us, I mean the African Americans and the African Africans that are here, the Africans in diaspora in general. Now we can come to a place that we feel welcome. Now we can come to a place that we can say that this is our village.